So good morning, everybody. My name is Lauren. I'm a third-year medical student at WVU. Welcome to our virtual Walk with the Future Doc. So I'm just going to give everyone a quick overview of what to expect over the next hour as we walk together virtually. So first, we're going to be hearing from Cathy Shaw about the topic of heart health with the DASH diet. And then as we all walk together, she'll be able to answer questions that anyone has. Everyone should have gotten a little pop-up notification to consent to recording of the Zoom call. And so only the audio portion will be made available publicly on our YouTube channel, which is WVU Walk with the Future Doc. So thank you everyone for joining us today in the cold weather, but we're all out here staying active. So now I'd like to introduce everyone to Cathy Shaw, who is a clinical dietitian at WVU Medicine's Medical Weight Management Clinic in Morgantown. So I will let her take it away and talk about heart health with the DASH diet.
Thank you, Lauren. Can everybody hear me okay? Oh my gosh.
Yes.
We are hardcore out here in the freezing cold, so I appreciate everybody coming out. I'm actually really excited that Mia asked me to talk about the DASH diet as a kind of a follow-up to her presentation last time on the Mediterranean diet. These are two of my favorite healthy eating patterns. So that was kind of exciting, especially since now we are launching into February, which is National Heart Month, of course. So it's a very appropriate topic. The DASH diet's consistently ranked at the top of the quote unquote best diets by US News and World Report every year, along with the Mediterranean diet and another diet called the flexitarian diet. So it's a very well-established healthy eating pattern. It is promoted by the NHLBI, which is the National Heart, Blood, and Lung Institute. And it's been researched extensively, which I'll touch on here in a couple minutes. It includes, what I like about it is it includes a really wide variety of foods from all the food groups. There's really nothing completely excluded. And it emphasizes foods that we've always learned have been healthy for us. So it's not super complex for people to understand. Sorry, it's like cold breath in the morning. So today what I'd like to talk about, I want to cover three things. One, what is a DASH diet and kind of what is the premise behind it? I want to talk about the tenets of the diet, like what are we supposed to eat? What are we not supposed to eat? And then I'm going to give you at least 5 simple ways that you can make your move to DASH, as they like to say. DASH actually stands for Dietary Purchase to Stop Hypertension. And this diet was developed basically back in the late 90s by about 160 different healthcare providers and researchers as a way to find an effective and flavorful way to help lower blood pressure. It was introduced probably in 1996, the American Heart Association, and then it was published, all the research was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1997. But basically, we know that high blood pressure increases the risk of many other life-threatening diseases. So, heart attack, stroke, heart failure, kidney failure. So that lowering blood pressure can in turn lower the risk of all these different diseases, plus our risk of death. So if we can find a way to lower blood pressure, we can solve a lot of, problems down the road. They did multiple studies on this diet in different ways, which I thought was kind of neat. They started out, with the original study, looking at the diet using the typical American content of, sodium intake for a day back then, which was about 3,500 milligrams a day. Today, I'd venture to say we're probably eating a bit more than that in a typical American diet. But even with that amount of sodium at 3,500 milligrams, it still was able to lower blood pressure within weeks, which they thought was pretty impressive. And then they took it one step further, studied it with about 2,300 milligrams of sodium, which is about the same amount of salt or sodium that you would find in a teaspoon of salt. And it found that the reductions were even greater and actually lowered LDL cholesterol as well. Then they took it one step further and they said, let's do this with 1,500 milligrams of sodium and see what happens. I don't know if you've ever tried to eat 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day, but that's a heavy duty task right there. They saw even further reductions with that level of sodium. So they were like, okay, the more sodium we take out, the better blood pressure gets. And then they kind of went and did a couple other variations of the diet. The Omni Heart study lowered the carbohydrate intake by about 10% and replaced it with proteins, including plant-based proteins or unsaturated fats. And what they found was even further improvements in blood pressure and lipid levels. And then they also did a small study where they replaced the fat-free, low-fat dairy with full-fat dairy. And what they did was they compensated for that by taking out things like fruit juice or other, potentially added sugars, and lowered the carbohydrate content by about 12%, and found that there was the same result even with the full fat dairy. So it kind of shows you can kind of modify things and still get the same results. So they thought that, well, that might make adherence a little bit better if they could modify things. It's also been shown to reduce the risk of osteoporosis, some cancers, kidney stones, even things like prediabetes, type 2 diabetes. And it can also be used for weight loss because it's a very nutrient-rich eating pattern. We have a lot of things that are very low in calories, but very high in nutrition. So what do you eat when you're following a DASH diet? Very plant-forward. So this is a very plant-forward eating pattern. Lots of fruits and vegetables. So we think of, the USDA and the dietary guidelines encouraging us to eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day total between the two. Well, DASH is more like aiming for 5 of each. So we're looking at anywhere from 3 to 5 servings of fruit, 3 to 5 servings of vegetables a day for a total of anywhere from 6 to 10, depending on your calorie needs. That's that's a big ask for most people, in my experience. But it is just a cornerstone of this diet. And then encouraging people to eat low fat or fat-free dairy, 2 to 3 servings a day, which is kind of goes along with the dietary guidelines or USDA recommendations. But there are reasons for that. Then whole grains, encouraging all whole grains, 6 to 8 servings a day, depending on your calorie needs. Basically, you're getting a lot of fiber out of those too. Lean proteins, poultry, fish, even eggs, less red meat, very limited amounts of processed meat because they're usually very high in sodium. Nuts, beans, seeds, legumes, all those wonderful plant-based proteins, at least 4 to 5 servings a week of those foods. And then smaller amounts of fats and oils, and really focusing on those monounsaturated fats. So things like olive oil and canola oil and other types of, avocado oil, those types of things. Basically, the saturated fat content is around, they want to keep it less than 6% of your total calories for the day in the original DASH diet. And then, of course, avoiding trans fat, which, as we established the last time we were talking, the FDA has banned trans fat and it's being removed from the food supply. But in addition to kind of limiting the red meat and the saturated fats, they also ask us to limit sweets and added sugars to less than 5 servings per week. And what they mean by a serving is like a tablespoon of honey, tablespoon of sugar, tablespoon of jams or jellies, things like that are just those added sugars in our diet. And as we know, though, you really have to start reading labels to reduce the amount of added sugar that we're getting in other foods too. So it's not just about the extra things we're putting on our toast or whatever, but the added sugars that are also being snuck into our manufactured foods. And then, of course, reducing sodium intake. That's kind of a given with this one, especially if you already have high blood pressure. So they want us to focus on about 2,300 milligrams a day. And if you're a dietitian, we know low sodium diet is 2,000 milligrams. So you're getting almost to that point. And, you know, when we look at that, that's exactly what's in about a teaspoon of salt every day. So it takes reading labels, you know. So one of the things I try to do is teach my patients how to read a nutrition label. You know, check out the sodium content, check out the added sugars, because it can help you make better choices. They want us to keep our alcohol to a minimum, use in moderation. Obviously, if you don't already drink, don't start. And then caffeine is something else that they mention, that if you feel that caffeine affects your blood pressure, that, you know, in a negative way, then you should probably just avoid it. So how can you make your move to DASH? One of the things I like is the actual DASH website has a handout that says, make the move to DASH. And it gives you all these great little tips. Add 1 serving of fruit or 1 serving of vegetables a day. You know, that's a very simple and easy way to start. And add them to what you already make. So if you're making soup, add more vegetables. If you're making a casserole, add some vegetables. If you're making a smoothie, put more fruit in it. You know, there's ways that you can sneak those things in there without it being dramatic. Add a serving of dairy. If you're lactose intolerant, which a lot of people are, you know, you can try lactose-free dairy products. You can also use soy milk that's fortified with calcium. You can even do things like Greek yogurt and cheese because they're generally better tolerated. But basically, you know, sub a glass of milk for that glass of soda that you're normally drinking. Try adding a meatless meal a week. That's something that I try to do in my house. Sometimes it goes over really great and sometimes it doesn't. But, you know, using those plant-based proteins, sometimes I have to add those plant-based proteins to something I'm already making. But you're using beans, lentils, and things like that. They're high in fiber, they're high in protein, potassium and magnesium, so they're going to benefit your blood pressure. Swap your bag of chips for a handful of almonds or walnuts. You get those heart-healthy fats. One thing that we have done for, I guess, years really, is to swap whole wheat pasta or chickpea pasta for regular pasta. So you get those whole grains. You can also do things like, you know, use avocado on your toast instead of butter. And start reading your food labels. Start reading those nutrition facts labels for reducing sodium and reducing added sugars. They're very plainly labeled now, especially the added sugars. That's been new in the last year. I tell patients, you know, if you need to follow a low sodium diet, 140 milligrams or less per serving on the food label. When we're watching our added sugars, you know, trying to get that number as close to 0 as possible. But even if you can't get down that far, you know, at least keep it in single digits, so you're not up in double digits on your added sugars. That at least you can kind of aim for that. I will say that the website has amazing resources. So if you go to the DASH website, you'll see meal patterns. You'll see weekly menus at different calorie levels, at different sodium levels. They have recipes. They even have a DASH tracker, so you can log your intake and kind of track your success. And Mia, if you want that link, I can certainly send that to you, or you can Google it and find it and share it with people, because it really is a nicely laid out website. All right. So I think that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a very, like I said, plant-forward diet, very similar to the Mediterranean diet, really with a couple of tweaks. We're actually probably eating a little bit more dairy, a little bit less fat, but otherwise very similar. Any questions?
All right. Yeah, thank you, Cathy. I will definitely share that website on our Facebook page, and I think I've been on the site before, so I'll be able to find it and share it. So we're going to open it up to questions now. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask out loud. We have Cathy and a few other physicians on the call with us, or you can type the question in the chat, and I'll make sure it gets read out loud. So you can send it to me, and I'm Mia. You can send it privately, or you can send it to everybody. I'll start you off with a question, Cathy. What are some things that we buy at the supermarket that have a lot of hidden sodium in them that maybe we should watch out for if we are doing this DASH diet?
Oh my gosh. Sodium is kind of like added sugar. It sneaks in there pretty much everywhere. So obviously things that are processed foods, right? You know, a lot of things like in boxes and cans and different kinds of pre-made things. But I even tell people to look at things like their bread, you know, if you're buying a wrap or if you're buying a loaf of bread, how much sodium is in there? Some of the wraps that I've picked up can be upwards of 300 to 400 milligrams of sodium. So, you know, I would encourage people to kind of anything that they have that's already kind of a packaged product to just look at that label to see, you know, how much sodium is actually in there. But bread is a big one, which might be surprising.
Yeah, that is surprising to me. I never would have thought that bread would have sodium in it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same with added sugar. You would never think, wow, why is there sugar in my bread? Oh my gosh, you'd be surprised that some slices of bread have almost a teaspoon of sugar in each slice.
Interesting. Well, we do have a question in the chat, and you were talking a little bit about meatless things or having a meatless meal. And the question was, is having fish, would you consider that a meatless meal?
Actually, it's not necessarily considered a meatless meal only because it's still what we would call animal protein, right? It's not plant-based protein. I think they should kind of name that a little bit differently. But it's definitely one of those lean protein sources that is encouraged on both the DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet. So, you know, even though it's not necessarily quote unquote meatless or, you know, animal-less, I guess would be a better title for that. But still an excellent source of protein to include. So when they say meatless, they mean more things like nuts, seeds, beans, lentils, legumes.
I have a question. If you're talking to your patients, do you recommend them making any healthy swaps at restaurants?
Oh, definitely. We know that a lot of people just eat takeout or restaurant food really quite frequently, very frequently, as a matter of fact. So, you know, some of the things that we talk about is encouraging things that are not so like covered in sauces, things like that, because that's where you get a lot of sodium. Oops. Sorry about that. My phone is like freezing up. But also things like, you know, if you're going to, instead of a cheeseburger, obviously, if they have salmon on the menu, that would be a better choice. Choosing sides of vegetables rather than sides of, you know, macaroni and cheese. Just kind of very easy swaps that you can do now in restaurants that, fortunately, a lot of restaurants now are providing options like that. So you can kind of, you know, modify things while you're there. It's not going to be perfect, but we definitely want them to make better choices than they're currently making. Oh man. I'm going to have to go out to my car and plug my phone back in.
Do patients generally find it pretty easy to switch to lower sodium, or is it pretty hard?
It can be kind of difficult depending on how much sodium you currently eat. And that would be simply because we're so used to that tolerance of high sodium intake. So I do encourage people to slowly cut back and not just jump right into a really low sodium diet, because it's going to taste really bad at first. Things taste like they have no flavor, and you know, you have to really up your game on, like, you know, herbs and spices and things like that to compensate for that lack of salt. And you know, it takes time, just like sometimes taking out sugar takes time too, because we develop that same kind of tolerance. But you know, once they get get a lot of that sodium out of their diet, what generally happens is when they eat things that are high in sodium, they taste so salty that they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that what I was eating was so salty. So it takes time and effort. And I think that could be part of, they talk about the compliance or the adherence rate with this diet as not being all that great. And there's reasons for that because, people aren't used to eating 8 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and they're not used to eating things without added salt. So it does take time to develop that taste for things.
All right, Cathy, we've got a few questions in the chat for you. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few questions in the chat for you. So the first one is,
Oh, shoot.
do you have any suggestions on helping a family to make the move to the DASH diet, like helping kids to increase their intake of vegetables? Oh no, did we lose her? Yeah, I think we lost her. Dr. Haggerty, are you still here?
I think she mentioned that her phone was going to die.
Yeah, I think so too. Oh. Give us just a second here, everybody.
Okay, Tria, Dr. Haggerty accidentally hung up. Oh, there she is. She's back.
Oh, okay. They're both
They were
coming back
asking
now.
for you.
Okay.
Because I think we lost Cathy.
I'm back.
She's back now.
I'm sorry, I accidentally hung up on you all. What were you all asking?
Okay, so the question was in the chat was, is there any good advice that you can give on helping a whole family make the move to the DASH diet and like helping kids increase their vegetables?
Oh
my, yeah. Hey, Tria would be a great one to answer that. She has her kids eating all kinds of vegetables.
Go ahead,
yeah,
Dr. Haggerty.
my advice is that you just make it the normal that they eat what the family eats. We don't make a separate meal for our kids, and they in no way expect a separate meal because it's never been an option for them. Now, I will say we've had dietary slip in our household happen over time. Like right at the beginning of the pandemic, I was getting into giving them like processed breakfast because it was easy. And when I took that away, it was, I tried to make sure that what breakfast I gave them was stuff they liked, but was acceptable in our household. But also after a few days, they kind of readjusted. The other thing is we don't push them to complete their plate. So some of you may have seen last night, those there in the Facebook group for the medical weight management clinic. I cut up vegetables last night, roasted them. It's a common thing in our household. I just put olive oil on it. I don't put any seasoning on it till it's on my plate. But both my kids ate it without me even commenting about it. Mm-hmm. So I think that if you just make it the normal, and also that your kids don't think that the option is to make something else. Like I don't even buy chicken nuggets, which I know is common in a lot of households. We don't buy them. It's just not an option in our house. So that's my biggest recommendation to people is just make it normal that your family eats a meal together as best you can.
And I would add to that too, let them participate. This is, they need to be part of that process in the household. Number one, parents take the lead, obviously, especially when you have small children. So you doing things models behavior for them. And then allowing them to participate in what are we going to have for dinner? What kind of vegetable would we like to try this week? Would you like to pick out a different recipe? Do you want to help me cut things up? Do you want to help me cook? Those things excite kids into really wanting to try new things if they're a part of it. So if we can get all of our family involved in those types of, And if you're trying to change your habits now after, say your kids are 10 or 12 years old, it's a little bit more difficult because they have a lot of ingrained patterns that are already there. But
Yeah.
doing it slowly, like we were talking about, adding one new vegetable a week or one serving of vegetables a day, it might just be a handful of carrots at lunchtime or whatever. Just kind of moving them very gradually into a new eating pattern, because if you change everything drastically all at one time, it's not going to go over well. You just want to take it easy, do things one thing at a time, and they'll adjust. They're resilient.
Two things that I've noticed. Well, two things. One that I've noticed and one that I've done. So with mine being 6 and 9, but when they were 5 and 8, I bought them cutting gloves, which are like $10 for 2 pairs, and they're gloves with metal. They feel like cotton gloves, but a knife can't go through them. So I let my kids cut with my sharp knives. That's one thing I do with the gloves on. And that way they learn with the gloves on, and later we'll take the gloves away.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is we tend to snack on cut vegetables when I'm cooking dinner or something. And I don't comment to them. I don't tell them that I'm cutting up the vegetables. I more just figure I'm doing it for me. But invariably, every single day, they start coming and sneaking their hands over the counter, grabbing whatever vegetable I'm cutting up. So I just don't make it a thing.
They're
That's
hungry.
literally how I do it. I just don't make it a thing.
Yeah. And it's not taking things away. I think that's really important too. Like, it's not taking things away, it's adding things. So it's not like you can't have Oreos, you can only have fruit. But it's like, here, do you want a piece of fruit?
Well, and when you say that about Oreos, like, I don't tell my kids they can't have Oreos, but we don't just keep them in our house.
Right.
So if we go somewhere and somebody has Oreos, which for a year that hasn't been a thing, but they go to my parents' house because my parents live across the road and help me with childcare and stuff while I'm working. That my parents definitely give them treats, so they're not like treated bad or anything, but they get an appropriate amount instead of an excessive amount.
Right. And it's, and if your child is used to having all of those things all the time, distracting them with something else can be helpful rather than just taking these away you can't have. So, when you have families who have had, infinite, and even adults, whatever, infinite amounts of junk food in the house, you can't just like go in and clean it all out and throw it in the garbage, right? You have to kind of ease into that. So offering them, healthy options. I love Ellen Satter's division of responsibility, which she says, as an adult, it is our job to offer healthy things, healthy choices. It is the child's job or the child's responsibility to choose what and how much. So when we offer them things that are healthy, and they know that that's the norm, like you said, it goes over much better.
Yeah, I think the other thing that is really important, at least in my household, but it's easy for me to say this with young kids that aren't in a bunch of activities. They are, but we're still doing them as a full family. I think eating together is really important for at least one meal a day. Because then it's the normal. Everybody's eating the same thing. It's the family meal. Instead of making what I see a lot in people I know and patients is making the kids meal at one point in the evening, and then after the kids are done making the adult meal. I don't have time to do that, but also that's training them that kids do eat separate and different, which I don't like that idea much in our house.
Agree.
I do have another question in the chat, and the question is, are there some fruits and vegetables that are better than others?
That's a loaded question, because I will tell you no. If you are eating fruits and vegetables, it's way better than some of the other stuff you've been eating. Now, different fruits and vegetables have different nutrients, and I encourage people to eat a huge variety of colors and flavors. So I would, as a dietitian, I would say a pretty much a resounding no, like all fruits and vegetables are healthy. If you have certain issues, like certain medical problems, then yes, then we'll talk about what fruits and vegetables might not be appropriate for. Say if you have kidney disease, we know that things that are super high in potassium, if you have problems with your potassium levels, we need to kind of wean those down or cut those out. So there are definitely appropriate adjustments for medical issues, but for the average public, no. Like if I have one more person tell me that their trainer told them not to eat bananas, I'm gonna like do cartwheels down the road. Yeah.
Dr. Haggerty, I just have a question because you're talking a little bit about kids' meals. I'm just curious, when you and your family go to a restaurant, do your kids typically order off of the kids' menu, which has like, chicken nuggets, pizza, hot dogs? Or what do you do about that?
Yeah. Well, we're not monsters, so yes. I'm kidding. There's other people that don't, but yeah, we let our kids eat off the menu. I will say my kids love salad, oddly. And I actually blame that on the fact that we don't eat a lot of salad in our house. That I think my kids see it as exotic and different. I don't know. But they tend to order salad off the kids' menu a lot. So one thing they get, the spaghetti was always, we don't eat noodles in our house. And because my husband's diabetes, not for noodles aren't bad. It's not in our diet. And my kids tend to like the spaghetti, but yeah, when we're at restaurants, they order off the kids' menu usually. But I also think it's okay for them to see that, eating out as special and a treat or, different from a normal meal.
Okay,
Yeah,
good. I'm curious.
That's key though too. It's special and a treat for them. It's not a normal everyday occurrence like it is for other people.
Yeah. But yeah, my kids will fully go for the kids' meal menu happily. I tell you, they actually really like to pick off my plate a lot too. So I don't know. I mean, I think my kids are pretty good about their palate. They'll eat anything.
All right, if anybody has any more questions, you are free to put them in the chat or say them out loud. But
Everybody ready to go home and dash?
If we were dashing, we would probably be warmer.
Yes, definitely.
If we were jogging, but we're just walking, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I see a question in the chat.
Oh, do you want to read it, Meg?
Yeah, it says, could you please repeat the suggested daily recommendations for sodium?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the average recommendation is about 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day, which we would consider close to a low sodium diet. And that's for basically, trying to moderate your sodium intake and lower your blood pressure. Most American diets are much higher than that, so sometimes it takes a little bit of effort to get down to that. For people who are really having issues with high blood pressure and things like congestive heart failure or edema, swelling in their extremities, things like that, sometimes they recommend the lower sodium version of this diet, which is 1,500 milligrams a day. I will say that's a really difficult target to achieve for most people, but it can be helpful for people who are really struggling with those medical problems. I've tried to get down to 1,500, and boy, oh boy, that's hard.
Hey, Cathy, if you're doing that diet, like what kind of seasonings do you recommend to patients? Maybe you went over this, but do you recommend to patients if they want to season their food, but to stay away from that salt? Because
Oh
I think
yeah,
my household would struggle with that.
yeah, it is kind of a struggle, especially if you're used to eating a lot of processed foods or using a lot of salt in your cooking. I will have a lot of people tell me, well, I don't use any salt in my cooking. So they're getting most of their sodium out of the processed foods. But to cook, oh my gosh, herbs, spices. Mrs. Dash is a great one because there's several different varieties that are all sodium free. And you know, it's an easy way to season food, so you're not having to combine herbs and spices like a chef would be doing, and any kind of herb blends that are sodium free. We do a lot of herb blends in my house, and of course I love all kinds of different herbs that I grow outside and things like that. I do encourage people to experiment with it, you know, because they will tell me, I'm afraid to use that because I think I'm going to mess it up so bad. Like, I don't know how to use herbs and spices. So it kind of takes a little bit of experimenting and a little bit of courage sometimes to start using those things. But oh my gosh, they add so much flavor to your food without having the salt in it. It's amazing the difference.
I could add to that too. I was reading up about the DASH diet and like how to lower your sodium when you like add. People tend to add extra salt to things, and a lot of hard cheeses have that like salty taste.
Yes.
So you could put that. I like asparagus with Parmesan cheese on it.
Parmesan.
So that is good. And then if you buy like light or like low sodium or no sodium soy sauce, that can also be a good idea too.
Yes. And there's so many lower sodium blends now too, which has been really great, a great addition to, you know, grocery shopping. You know, some of the mixes and things that we might normally find, like marinades and taco seasoning and, you know, all that stuff that you could make it yourself at home. But now you can actually find it at the store, you know, at least reduced sodium, if not low sodium. You know, broths and all kinds of things you can find, and vegetables that are canned without added salt, so there's virtually no sodium in them. There's a lot of options out there now to kind of like tweak your sodium intake. It's actually great. We kind of went on a mission to kind of reduce our sodium intake along probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And one of the things that I've done is just kind of, you know, use half and half. So if I'm making a soup, I might use half low sodium broth and half regular, or I might make my tomatoes canned without added salt, but use a little bit more sodium in my broth. So it's kind of just reducing things without cutting it all out at one time.
So I don't cook that much, as everyone knows, but I can make soup. And yeah, my kids might make fun of my soup because it always turns out orange. But anyway, it's actually pretty decent soup. But what I've started doing is I got rid of the broth. I just use water, and I actually find that it tastes so much better because it's not overpowered by this broth flavor. You can actually like taste all the vegetables in the soup. Now you have to add, you know, some salt, but I still think you probably end up with less. And I just actually honestly prefer it without broth.
Yeah, I find that vegetable broth too, when you buy vegetable broth at the store, it is salty, like really salty. They add a lot of sodium to that. And making your own stock can be so great too, because, you know, if you make your own stock, you can even put it in the freezer and use it later. And you don't have to add all that salt to it at all.
All right, are there any more questions? Are we ready to wrap it up and go home and get warm?
Thanks, Cathy.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thank you, Cathy. Could you give us, to wrap it up today, could you give us like a few major points about the DASH diet and heart healthy eating?
Oh my gosh, sure. Eat your fruits and vegetables. I think that is like something that I harp on every day. Make sure that you're watching your added sugars and your sodium. But make it fun. Go home this morning for breakfast. If you haven't had it yet, go home and have a nice bowl of fruit with your breakfast.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cathy, for leading the conversation today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the cold, wherever you are. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for getting out and walking. We're so proud of you, and we encourage you to keep doing it with us every 2 weeks on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We are trying to see how far this program reaches. So right now, if you would, go ahead and type in the chat who you are and where you're walking from. We would love to see how far we're reaching and the people that we're making an impact on. So thanks so much, everybody. Our next walk will be in 2 weeks at 9 a.m. on Saturday. So thanks for joining us and have a great weekend, everybody.